The volcanic ash of Iwo Jima was still smoking from the pre-invasion bombardment when Corporal Tony Stein crouched behind a shallow depression at 0900 on February 19, 1945. In his hands, he gripped a weapon that his sergeant had dismissed as a stupid idea just 3 months earlier. The 23-year-old toolmaker from Dayton, Ohio, was about to revolutionize infantry combat with a salvaged aircraft gun and prove that sometimes the best weapons come from desperate innovation rather than military factories. Around him, the initial wave of Marines from Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines struggled to establish a foothold beyond the beach. The Japanese had transformed this 8-square-mile volcanic rock into a fortress of death, honeycombed with 11 miles of interconnected tunnels and 17,000 defenders who had spent months preparing overlapping fields of fire that turned every yard of advance into a lottery of survival. The black sand beneath Stein's boots was unlike any battlefield he'd experienced in his 6 previous combat missions. It wasn't really sand at all, but pulverized volcanic ash that grabbed at boots like quicksand, making every movement exhausting. Marines sank ankle-deep with each step, and the coarse particles worked their way into weapons, clothing, and wounds with malevolent persistence. By mid-morning, the 5th Marine Division had already lost 543 men, dead and wounded, scattered across the terraced beach like broken dolls. The pre-invasion bombardment, despite its fury, had barely scratched the Japanese defenses. From hidden pillboxes carved into the volcanic rock, enemy machine guns created interlocking patterns of death. Mortars dropped from positions the Marines couldn't see, couldn't reach, couldn't silence. The standard-issue Browning M19 and 19 machine guns that should have provided suppressing fire were proving inadequate for the assault. Each weapon weighed 31 pounds empty, fired 400 rounds per minute, and required a crew of 2 to operate effectively. They were excellent defensive weapons, but in an assault against fortified positions, they were too heavy, too slow to deploy, and couldn't generate the volume of fire needed to suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously. Stein had recognized this problem months earlier during training exercises at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii. He had watched machine gun crews struggle to keep pace with advancing rifle platoons, constantly falling behind as they stopped to set up, fire, break down, and move forward. By the time they were ready to provide covering fire again, the assault's momentum had dissipated, and Japanese defenders had recovered from any suppression. But Tony Stein wasn't just another Marine. He was a toolmaker, a craftsman who understood machines with an intimacy born from years of working with his hands. Born to Austrian Jewish immigrants who had fled the pogroms of Eastern Europe, Stein had grown up understanding that survival often required innovation. His parents had reinvented themselves in America. Their son would reinvent the tools of war. As a teenager, Stein had worked at Wright-Patterson Field, learning the intricacies of aircraft maintenance. Later, as a tool and die maker at Delco Products, he had mastered the art of precision manufacturing. He understood tolerances, stress points, and the elegant relationship between form and function that separated a good tool from a great one. When he joined the Marine Corps in September 1942, that mechanical mind came with him. His first taste of combat had come at Bougainville, where he'd distinguished himself by killing 5 Japanese snipers in a single day. but it was his ability to modify and improve equipment that caught the attention of Sergeant Mel Grevich, another Marine who understood that standard issue didn't always mean best suited. Grevich had been experimenting with something extraordinary during the Bougainville campaign in 1943. He had salvaged an ANL M2 aircraft machine gun from a crashed Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber. While other Marines saw wreckage, Grevich saw possibility. The AN-M2 was designed for aerial combat, firing from aircraft mounts at other aircraft. It weighed only 21 pounds, 10 pounds lighter than the M1919, and could fire 200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, 3 times faster than standard infantry machine guns. The weapon's devastating rate of fire came from its design purpose. In aerial combat, firing windows were measured in seconds. A fighter pilot might have only a brief moment when an enemy aircraft crossed his gun sights. The AN-M2 was built to put as many rounds as possible into that fleeting opportunity, but there was a fundamental problem with adapting it for ground use. The weapon had spade grips designed for aircraft mounts, no shoulder stock, no sights suitable for a human eye, no way for a single Marine to carry and fire it accurately while advancing. When Grevich approached Stein in November 1944, both men had just been transferred to the newly formed 5th Marine Division. The Paramarines had been disbanded, their specialized troops distributed to regular Marine units preparing for an operation everyone knew would be costly, though the target remained classified. Camp Tarawa buzzed with preparation and speculation. In a maintenance shed that smelled of gun oil and industrial solvent, Grevich showed Stein the salvaged AN-M2. To most Marines, it looked like a mechanical curiosity, a pilot's weapon with no infantry application. But Stein saw what Grevich had seen, potential waiting to be unlocked. They worked at night after regular duties, their hands moving with the certainty of men who understood their craft. Stein's first challenge was creating a stable firing platform. He selected an M1 Garand rifle stock, a piece of American craftsmanship already proven in combat. Using hand tools and patience, he hollowed out the stock to accept the aircraft gun's buffer tube. The fit had to be precise, too loose, and the weapon would shake apart under its own rate of fire. Too tight, and the buffer system wouldn't function properly. The trigger mechanism required more creativity. The AN-M2's original trigger was designed for electrical firing systems in aircraft. Stein fabricated a mechanical trigger using sheet metal salvaged from ammunition cans, creating a solenoid system that would reliably fire the weapon while standing up to combat conditions. Each component was hand-fitted, filed, and tested repeatedly. Grevich contributed his own expertise, welding a bipod from a Browning automatic rifle to the weapon's front end. The bipod would provide stability for prone firing while remaining light enough not to impede mobility. They added a carrying handle from a defunct machine gun, allowing the weapon to be carried at the hip during assault movements. For sights, they adapted a simple blade and notch system from a damaged rifle. Nothing fancy, but sufficient for the close-range fighting they anticipated. The completed weapon was a fusion of aircraft technology and infantry necessity, ugly as sin, but potentially devastating. It weighed 25 pounds loaded with a 100-round ammunition box, lighter than an M919, but capable of delivering 3 times the firepower. They called it the Stinger. Testing revealed both promise and problems. The weapon's rate of fire was genuinely stunning. Stein could empty a 100-round box in under 6 seconds of continuous fire. At 200 yards, that stream of bullets could saturate a target area with devastating effect. But that same rate of fire created challenges. The thin aircraft barrel, designed to be cooled by 300-mile-per-hour slipstreams, heated rapidly in ground combat. The ammunition consumption was voracious. A Marine could burn through his entire basic load in less than a minute of firing. Still, Stein believed the advantages outweighed the drawbacks. In an assault against fortified positions, the ability to deliver overwhelming firepower in the crucial seconds when enemy gunners exposed themselves could mean the difference between breakthrough and bloody repulse. He built 6 Stingers total, 1 for each of Company A's 3 rifle platoons, 1 for the weapons platoon, 1 for Grevich, and 1 for himself. The reaction from other Marines ranged from skepticism to outright derision. Old-timers who had fought at Guadalcanal and Tarawa looked at the improvised weapons and shook their heads. One sergeant examined Stein's handiwork and declared it would jam on the first burst. Another predicted the barrel would melt before they could change magazines. A lieutenant from 2nd Battalion said only an idiot would trust his life to a homemade gun. But when Stein demonstrated the weapon on Camp Tarawa's rifle range, opinions shifted. The sheer violence of the Stinger's fire was undeniable. In 6 seconds, Stein could put more rounds on target than an M19E19 could deliver in 20. The beaten zone, the area where bullets impacted, was smaller due to the weapon's higher cyclic rate, meaning more rounds hit within the target area rather than dispersing widely. Company commanders, desperate for any advantage in the coming assault, approved the weapons. Battalion headquarters, while skeptical, didn't forbid them. As experimental weapons carried by volunteers, the Stingers would go to war. Now, on the black sand of Iwo Jima, with Marines dying around him because they couldn't locate, much less suppress, the hidden Japanese positions, Stein made the decision that would define the rest of his life, all 7 days of it. Standard tactical doctrine called for tanks or naval gunfire support against fortified positions, but the tanks were bogged down in the loose volcanic ash, throwing tracks and sinking to their sponsons. Naval shells, no matter how powerful, couldn't hit targets the spotters couldn't see. The Japanese had learned from 3 years of island warfare. Their positions were mutually supporting, carefully camouflaged, and designed to remain hidden until American forces were committed and vulnerable. Machine gunners would hold fire until Marine units were in the open, then unleash coordinated volleys that turned the black sand red with blood. Stein understood the tactical problem with a toolmaker's clarity. The enemy positions had to be located before they could be destroyed. To locate them, someone had to draw their fire. To survive drawing their fire, that someone needed overwhelming firepower to suppress the enemy guns the instant they revealed themselves. The Stinger was built for exactly this moment. What happened next entered Marine Corps legend. Tony Stein stood up, not crouched, not kneeling, but fully upright in the middle of a beach where Japanese machine gunners had been specifically positioned to create interlocking fields of fire with no dead space. Every manual, every training exercise, every instinct screamed against such exposure. But Stein understood that half measures would fail. He needed the enemy to fire at him. He needed to see their muzzle flashes. He needed them to reveal positions they had spent months camouflaging. Bullets snapped past his head with the distinctive crack of supersonic rounds. Mortar shells burst in the volcanic ash, sending up geysers of black sand mixed with steel fragments. And then Stein saw what he was looking for. A pillbox 75 yards to the northwest, so perfectly camouflaged with volcanic rock and sand that it was invisible until the Type 92 heavy machine gun inside opened fire. The Type 92 was a formidable weapon, firing 450 rounds per minute of 7.7 millimeter ammunition. In the hands of experienced gunners behind concrete protection, it had already killed dozens of Marines that morning. But as the Japanese gun crew swung their weapon to track the insane Marine standing in the open, Stein was already moving. He dropped to one knee, brought the Stinger to his shoulder, aligned the crude sights, and squeezed the solenoid trigger. The improvised weapon roared to life with a sound unlike any standard military arm. At 200 rounds per minute, individual shots merged into a continuous roar, a mechanical scream that announced a new kind of warfare. The effect on the pillbox was instantaneous and devastating. Where the Type 92 delivered measured bursts, the Stinger unleashed a tornado. The 100-round belt of .30 caliber ammunition hammered into the pillbox's firing slit in a concentrated stream. Concrete chipped and shattered. Volcanic rock exploded into dust. The camouflage that had hidden the position disintegrated under the torrent of lead. Inside the pillbox, the Japanese gun crew faced a nightmare they hadn't trained for. Standard American machine guns fired at rates they could work around, ducking during bursts, returning fire during pauses. But the Stinger offered no pauses. Its continuous stream of fire was like facing a scaled-down version of their own aircraft cannon. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical one. The Type 92 fell silent, its crew dead or cowering below the firing slit as bullets continued to snap through the confined space. Stein shifted his aim to a second pillbox 40 yards to the left that had opened fire when the first position was suppressed. Another 5-second burst, another 100 rounds saturating a target designed to withstand conventional infantry weapons. The concrete absorbed some rounds, but the sheer volume overwhelmed the position's defenses. The firing slit, designed to protect the gunners while allowing them to fire out, became a funnel channeling American bullets in. Around Stein, Marines who had been pinned in shallow depressions began to move. Sergeants shouted orders. Squad leaders pointed at objectives. The assault that had stalled in the face of invisible death was moving again. The Stinger had broken the tactical equation that favored the defender. Instead of extended firefights where Japanese positions could engage from concealment, Stein was delivering instant, overwhelming suppression. But the weapon's appetite revealed itself immediately. After less than 10 seconds of actual trigger time, the Stinger went silent. The 100-round ammunition box was empty. Stein had anticipated this problem intellectually during training, but experiencing it in combat was different. The weapon that could suppress enemy positions faster than any standard arm also consumed ammunition at a rate that would have horrified military logisticians. The nearest ammunition resupply point was 200 yards behind him at the waterline, where landing craft continued to brave mortar fire to deliver supplies. Between Stein and those supplies lay open ground already zeroed by Japanese mortars and machine guns. Every Marine on the beach understood that crossing open ground under fire was often a one-way journey. But Stein had already made his calculations. His platoon was advancing because of the Stinger's suppressive fire. Without it, they would bog down again, and more Marines would die in the volcanic ash. The mathematical equation was simple: his life at risk versus certain death for many others. For a man who had grown up understanding that survival sometimes required extraordinary measures, the decision was already made. He started running. The volcanic sand of Iwo Jima was unlike any terrain the Marines had trained on. It wasn't packed beach sand, but loose volcanic ash that had accumulated over centuries. Each step sank 3 inches or more, and the coarse particles provided no stable footing. Marines described it as running through ball bearings or trying to sprint in deep snow. It exhausted the leg muscles and turned what should have been a 2-minute run into a 5-minute ordeal. Halfway to the beach, Stein encountered a wounded Marine from 2nd Platoon. The private first class had taken shrapnel to his left leg and couldn't walk. In any conventional military calculus, Stein should have marked the man's position and continued his mission. Speed was survival when crossing open ground, but Tony Stein operated by different calculations. Without breaking stride, he grabbed the wounded Marine, slung him over his shoulder, and kept running. The man weighed approximately 160 pounds. The Stinger weighed 25. Stein's combat pack added another 30. He was now carrying over 215 pounds through volcanic ash, while Japanese mortars walked their deadly patterns across the beach. Physics and determination battled with each step. The loose ash that grabbed at his boots now had to support triple the weight. His leg muscles, already burning from the exertion, screamed protests his mind ignored. Japanese snipers, always seeking high-value targets, began focusing on the Marine carrying both a weapon and a wounded comrade. Bullets cracked past, kicking up small geysers of black sand. A mortar round detonated 30 yards to his right, the explosion lifting a column of ash mixed with razor-sharp steel fragments. Stein didn't deviate, didn't seek cover, didn't slow down. The calculations remained constant. Speed equaled survival. Hesitation equaled death. He reached the supply point at 0945, his lungs burning and legs shaking from the exertion. Navy corpsmen immediately took charge of the wounded Marine, professionally assessing and treating the shrapnel wounds. Stein didn't pause to rest. He grabbed 4 ammunition boxes, each containing 100 rounds of linked .30 caliber ammunition. He stuffed 2 boxes into his pack, carried one in each hand, and turned back toward his platoon's position. The return journey was its own form of hell. Japanese forces had observed his run to the beach and anticipated his return. Snipers adjusted their positions. Mortar teams calculated new firing solutions. Machine gunners who had remained hidden now watched for the Marine carrying the distinctive weapon that had silenced 2 of their positions. But Stein had advantages beyond courage. His years as a toolmaker had given him an engineer's understanding of angles and probability. He didn't run in a straight line, but traced an irregular path that made him a difficult target for Japanese gunners trained to lead predictable movement. When mortar rounds impacted, he instinctively moved toward the explosion sites, understanding that Japanese doctrine rarely put two rounds in the same place. The 3-minute return journey felt like hours. Each step through the clutching ash required conscious effort. The ammunition boxes grew heavier with each yard. But Stein's platoon was still advancing, still needing the Stinger's suppressive fire, still depending on their toolmaker with his impossible weapon. When he reached Company A's position, his platoon sergeant wordlessly pointed toward a third pillbox. This one was different, larger, reinforced concrete instead of volcanic rock and sandbags, with a Type 96 light machine gun that commanded the approaches to the airfield. 2 previous assaults had failed, leaving 4 Marines dead in the black sand before it, their bodies twisted into the unnatural poses that violent death brings. Stein loaded a fresh ammunition box into the Stinger, his fingers working with practiced efficiency despite the exhaustion. He checked the belt feed, ensuring the first round was properly seated. The weapon was already hot from its previous engagements, the thin aircraft barrel radiating heat that made the air shimmer. In aerial combat, that barrel would be cooled by 300-mile-per-hour airflow. On the ground, it had only the volcanic ash-laden air of Iwo Jima. He stood up and advanced on the pillbox alone. The Type 96 opened fire immediately. The Japanese gunner was experienced, walking his bursts toward the advancing Marine with mechanical precision. Rounds snapped past Stein's head and chest, close enough that he could feel their passage disturbing the air. At 50 yards, dangerously close for such an engagement, Stein brought the Stinger to his shoulder and opened fire. The effect was immediate and decisive. The Type 96's gunner, accustomed to engaging enemies who fired in short bursts, couldn't adjust to the continuous stream of lead pouring through his firing slit. Where he expected pauses to return fire, there were none. Where he anticipated the enemy needing to reload after 20 rounds, the Stinger kept firing. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. Facing the Stinger was like trying to fight a waterfall with a garden hose. Stein's rounds found the firing slit with toolmaker's precision. The Japanese gun went silent, its crew either dead or driven below the opening by the relentless fire. Stein charged the final 20 yards and dropped a grenade through the opening, the explosion confirming what the Stinger had started. The position was neutralized. But again, the ammunition box was empty. Less than 10 seconds of trigger time had consumed another 100 rounds. The Stinger's devastating effectiveness came at a logistical cost that would have made quartermasters weep. In conventional warfare, a machine gunner might fire 1,000 rounds during an entire day's combat. Stein was burning through that in minutes. He began his second run to the beach. This time, the journey revealed new horrors and demanded new choices. 20 yards into his run, he encountered 2 wounded Marines. One had a sucking chest wound, the distinctive whistle of air through punctured lung tissue that every combat Marine learned to recognize and fear. The other had lost most of his right hand to shrapnel, the damaged flesh wrapped in blood-soaked field dressings. The mathematics of combat demanded cruel calculations. Stein couldn't carry both men. The chest wound was more immediately life-threatening. That Marine would die in minutes without treatment. The hand wound, while devastating, could wait precious seconds longer. Stein made his choice, scooping up the chest wound casualty and resuming his run to the beach. The Marine's blood soaked into Stein's already filthy uniform. Each labored breath whistled through the wound, a sound that would haunt survivors decades later. But Stein's pace never slowed. He delivered the casualty to the beach aid station, where corpsmen immediately went to work with plasma and pressure bandages. Without pausing for the thanks he'd never hear, Stein grabbed more ammunition and made a third trip specifically to retrieve the Marine with the destroyed hand. By 10:30, Stein had completed 4 runs between the beach and the front lines. Each journey was its own epic of endurance and courage. Each time he had carried a wounded Marine to safety. Each time he had returned with the ammunition that kept the Stinger firing and his platoon advancing. They had pushed 200 yards inland from their initial positions, a distance that might seem trivial on a map, but represented hundreds of lives saved or lost in the arithmetic of island warfare. The Stinger was showing the strain of continuous combat. The barrel, never designed for sustained ground fighting, was discolored from heat, the steel taking on the purple-blue hue that indicated dangerous temperature stress. The solenoid trigger mechanism, hand-fabricated from salvaged materials, was beginning to stick. Sometimes it would fire when he squeezed it. Sometimes it required a sharp tap with his palm to reset. But the weapon's greatest strain was on its operator. Stein looked down at his boots, Marine Corps issue that had carried him through training and across Pacific islands, and saw they were disintegrating. The volcanic ash of Iwo Jima was like no other battlefield terrain. The coarse particles worked into every seam and stress point, grinding away leather and stitching with each step. The soles were separating from the uppers. Every step sent sharp pains through his feet as the damaged boots failed to protect against the abrasive ash. Tony Stein made a decision that would become Marine Corps legend. He unlaced his boots and kicked them off. To observers, the decision seemed insane. The volcanic ash was coarse as ground glass, hot from the sun and contaminated with the detritus of battle, shell fragments, spent brass, and worse. But Stein understood physics and efficiency. The disintegrating boots were adding friction without providing protection. They were slowing him down, and in the mathematics of combat, speed equaled survival. He also removed his helmet. The M1 steel pot weighed only 2.5 pounds, but combined with the boots, he was shedding nearly 5 pounds of equipment, 5 pounds that would let him move faster between the beach and his platoon. 5 pounds that might mean the difference between delivering ammunition in time or watching positions fall for lack of suppressive fire. His 5th run to the beach took 2 minutes and 40 seconds, nearly 20 seconds faster than his previous journey. Barefoot, he could actually gain better traction in the loose volcanic sand. His feet sank into the ash, but without the rigid boot soles, he could feel the terrain and adjust his stride. It was painful. The ash was coarse and cut into his feet with each step, but it was faster. He grabbed another wounded Marine on the way down, a soldier with shrapnel wounds to the abdomen who had lost consciousness. Stein carried him over his shoulder, his bare feet finding purchase in the volcanic sand that boots would have slipped on. At the aid station, he loaded up on ammunition and turned for another run back to the fighting. By 1100 hours, Stein had completed 6 runs. He had personally evacuated 6 wounded Marines who would have died without immediate medical attention. He had delivered 600 rounds of ammunition to keep the Stinger operational. His platoon had advanced 300 yards from the beach, approaching the first airfield that was a key objective for the invasion. The Japanese resistance was intensifying as the Marines pushed deeper into the island's defenses. The enemy had constructed a sophisticated defensive network. Pillboxes, spider holes, and underground bunkers connected by tunnels. When one position was destroyed, soldiers would emerge from another location to resume firing. It was like fighting a hydra. Cut off one head and 2 more appeared. The Stinger was the only weapon in Company A that could deliver enough volume of fire to keep multiple positions suppressed simultaneously. When Stein opened up on one pillbox, the sheer sound, that distinctive high-pitched roar of 1,200 rounds per minute, was enough to make adjacent positions hesitate. That hesitation, measured in seconds, gave riflemen time to advance and throw grenades into enemy positions. But the weapon was degrading with each engagement. The barrel now glowed visibly after sustained fire, the thin aircraft steel never designed for the heat buildup of ground combat. In the air, diving at 300 miles per hour, the slipstream would cool the barrel between bursts. On the ground, with no cooling beyond the ash-laden air of Iwo Jima, the heat had nowhere to go. The solenoid trigger mechanism, Stein's hand-fabricated solution to making an aircraft weapon infantry portable, was failing under the stress of combat. Sheet metal and salvaged parts, no matter how cleverly assembled, couldn't match the durability of factory-manufactured components. Sometimes it would stick open, requiring Stein to manually interrupt the belt feed to stop firing. Sometimes it wouldn't fire at all until he slapped the mechanism to reset it. At 11:20, Stein's platoon encountered a position that stopped even the Stinger's advance. It was a reinforced concrete bunker with 3 firing slits arranged to provide overlapping fields of fire. Multiple Type 96 light machine guns inside created a wall of lead that no infantry could penetrate. 2 tank destroyers had attempted to knock it out, but were driven back by concealed 47mm anti-tank guns. An airstrike was called in, but the bombs fell 50 yards off target, serving only to announce the bunker's importance. Stein studied the position with a toolmaker's eye for detail. The firing slits were narrow, perhaps 8 inches wide by 4 inches tall. Difficult targets for aimed fire, but the Stinger didn't rely on precision. Its advantage was volume. If he could put enough rounds toward those slits, statistical probability guaranteed some would find their way through. He advanced alone to 50 yards from the bunker, suicidally close by conventional infantry tactics. Going prone in the volcanic ash, he opened fire. The Stinger emptied its 100-round box in 7 seconds of continuous fire. At that range, with the beaten zone of the bullets concentrated by the high rate of fire, at least 30 rounds went through the firing slits. The effect inside the bunker was catastrophic. The Japanese defenders, prepared for conventional infantry weapons, faced a stream of bullets that turned their protective fortification into a death trap. Rounds ricocheted off concrete walls, multiplying their lethal effect. The guns inside went silent. Stein reloaded with his last ammunition box and charged the bunker. He reached the nearest firing slit and dropped grenades through, the explosions confirming what the stinger had begun. 5 Japanese soldiers died in that bunker, their defensive position turned into a tomb by an aircraft gun that was never supposed to be there. Company A's advance resumed, but Stein was out of ammunition again. His 7th trip to the beach came at 11:50, and this run would test the very limits of human endurance. Halfway to the beach, he encountered a Marine who had triggered a mine. Both legs were gone below the knees, traumatic amputations that were bleeding out the Marine's life onto the black sand. The man was conscious, screaming in agony and shock. Without hesitation, Stein scooped up the dying Marine and ran. The casualty's blood poured onto Stein's uniform, mixing with the sweat and grime of 7 hours of continuous combat. Each of the Marines' screams drove Stein to run faster, his bare feet now leaving bloody prints in the volcanic ash. The corpsman later reported that if Stein had been 30 seconds slower, the Marine would have died from blood loss. Instead, immediate medical intervention saved his life, a life that existed only because a barefoot toolmaker refused to let mathematics of combat override humanity. On the return trip, Stein encountered something that confirmed the stinger's impact on the battle. Another Marine was carrying one of Grevich's stingers, the weapon jammed and inoperative. The Marine reported that his weapon had overheated after prolonged firing, the barrel warping enough to prevent the bolt from cycling. He was heading to the beach to see if an armorer could repair it. Stein looked at his own stinger. The barrel was discolored purple-blue from heat stress. The wooden furniture from the Garand stock was charring from the barrel's temperature. The bipod was working loose from its welds, but it still fired. It still delivered the overwhelming firepower that kept Japanese heads down and allowed Marine advances. He made his 8th trip at 12:30. Another wounded Marine, another load of ammunition. By now, his repeated runs had attracted attention throughout the beachhead. Some Marines thought he was insane, running barefoot through hell for reasons they couldn't understand. Others recognized him as the lifeline that kept their advance moving. The barefoot corporal was becoming a legend in real time. But on his 8th return trip, the Japanese adapted to Stein's pattern. A sniper had moved into position overlooking the supply route, specifically to target the Marine making repeated ammunition runs. As Stein ran back toward Company A with 4 ammunition boxes, a round cracked past his head, close enough that he felt the supersonic shock wave. 6 inches lower, and Tony Stein's war would have ended in the volcanic ash. He dropped flat instantly, the stinger landing beside him. For the first time that day, Tony Stein was pinned down. The sniper was skilled, patient, disciplined, everything Japanese military doctrine demanded. From the angle of the shot, Stein calculated the sniper's approximate position, somewhere on the ridgeline 200 yards east, probably in a spider hole or natural fold in the volcanic rock. Stein lay motionless for 30 seconds, controlling his breathing, becoming part of the landscape. The sniper would be glassing the area, looking for movement, waiting for his target to reveal himself. The volcanic ash around Stein's position offered no cover, just open terrain between the beach and forward positions. Another round cracked overhead, probing the area where Stein had been, not where he was. The sniper hadn't pinpointed him yet. In that moment, Stein made another calculation that defied conventional tactics. Instead of trying to low crawl to cover, instead of waiting for someone else to suppress the sniper, he rolled left, grabbed the stinger, and came up running, not away from the sniper, but toward him. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. Running perpendicular to the sniper's line of sight would make him a harder target than running directly away. More importantly, if he could close the distance, the Stinger's rate of fire would overwhelm any bolt-action rifle. It was the same principle that made fighter planes charge head-on at bombers, close the range and bring overwhelming firepower to bear. 3 more shots rang out, all missing, as Stein sprinted barefoot through the volcanic ash. At 150 yards, he saw movement, a figure in a spider hole partially concealed by volcanic rock. Stein dropped to one knee and opened fire. The Stinger roared its distinctive song, some 200 rounds per minute, turning the sniper's position into a maelstrom of flying rock chips and bullet impacts. When the ammunition box ran empty, there was no return fire. Stein approached carefully and confirmed the kill. A Japanese sniper with a Type 97 rifle equipped with a telescopic sight. Stein took the scope as a battlefield souvenir and continued toward Company A. When he reached his platoon at 1300, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. Company A was pinned down by a complex of 8 pillboxes arranged in a semicircle, each supporting the others with interlocking fields of fire. Any Marine who showed himself was immediately engaged by multiple positions. The company had taken 12 casualties in 20 minutes trying to advance. Tank support had been requested, but was unavailable. The M4 Shermans were still struggling in the volcanic ash near the beach, throwing tracks or bogging down in the loose material. Artillery support was limited because forward observers couldn't get clear sight lines to the enemy positions without exposing themselves to murderous fire. Stein moved to the forwardmost position and analyzed the tactical problem. The 8 pillboxes weren't individual positions, but parts of an integrated defensive system. Japanese soldiers moved through connecting trenches, shifting forces to meet threats. It was a sophisticated defense that had stopped 2 Marine companies cold. The Stinger's advantage, overwhelming volume of fire, could work here if applied correctly. Stein calculated that if he could suppress multiple positions simultaneously, riflemen could advance under that suppression. But it would require exposing himself to fire from 8 positions at once. Without hesitation, he stood up and opened fire on the leftmost pillbox. 5-second burst, 100 rounds, silence. He shifted to the next position. Another burst, another pillbox suppressed. He was methodically working his way across the entire arc, a one-man firebase delivering more weight of lead than a rifle squad. Japanese soldiers in the connecting trenches began engaging him with Type 99 rifles and Type 96 machine guns. Rounds kicked up volcanic ash around his feet. One bullet struck the Stinger's barrel with a distinctive metallic clang, but the weapon kept firing. The barrel was bent now, accuracy degraded, but at this range accuracy was less important than volume. While Stein fired, riflemen from Company A advanced 50 yards. When he dropped flat to reload, they held position. When he stood and resumed firing, they advanced another 50 yards. No orders were needed. The Marines instinctively understood that when the Stinger was firing, they could move. By 1330, Company A had broken through the defensive arc. 5 pillboxes were destroyed, 3 abandoned by defenders who couldn't face the Stinger's overwhelming fire. 17 confirmed Japanese casualties littered the positions. Company A had lost 3 more Marines, but the advance continued. Stein's Stinger was now critically damaged. The barrel bent from the bullet strike, the bipod completely broken off. The Garand stock charred black from heat. But it still fired. In the hands of its creator, it still delivered the firepower that made the difference between advance and bloody repulse. At 13:45, during an assault on the 6th pillbox, disaster struck. Stein was firing a sustained burst when a Japanese Type 96 machine gun scored a direct hit on the Stinger itself. The impact was violent, ripping the weapon from Stein. Dawn on February 20th found Stein awake and ready. The assault on Suribachi proved brutal beyond imagination. For 5 more days, he fought up those volcanic slopes with his damaged Stinger, until a grenade on February 25th sent him to a hospital ship. But Tony Stein couldn't stay away from his unit. Against medical orders, he returned to Company A on February 27th. The Stinger was gone, destroyed, or lost. He grabbed an M1 Garand and rejoined his depleted platoon. On March 1st, 1945, leading a patrol to locate enemy positions, a Japanese sniper's bullet found Tony Stein. He died instantly on the volcanic ash he'd run across barefoot to save his brothers. The Medal of Honor citation would mention his personally improvised aircraft-type weapon, but not call it the Stinger. That name lived only in Marine memories. 6 Stingers were built. None survived the war. But Tony Stein's legacy endured in 9 Marines who lived because he carried them to safety, in positions destroyed by impossible firepower, in the proof that one determined toolmaker with salvaged parts could change a battle's course. The barefoot corporal from Dayton had built a weapon that sang death to the enemy and salvation to his brothers.